Hi everyone, Lisa and Dan here from Fireside Strategic. We're on a mission to help business leaders achieve great results through human-centered strategy. We believe that businesses don't need to choose between investing in their humans and generating profit, because it's the humans that create profit. In the Fireside Chat series, we're showcasing how leaders can transcend the challenges of the COVID-19 crisis and broadly lead with a human-centered approach. Today, we're excited to chat with Scott W. Mills, the creator of the Human Evolution System, which is a gentle approach to creating more resilience, abundance, and joy in the lives of people. His work blends Eastern and Western approaches to train your brain to create more possibility. You can find him teaching on Mind Valley as well as working with private clients all over the world. Scott, thank you so much for joining us today. Can you please give us a little bit more of an explanation of who you are and your background?
Oh yeah, this is so much fun. So before I say anything else, I just have to acknowledge the two of you in this series. I think this is such a powerful series to be doing. It's so interesting. So many people are confused, lost, anxious, overwhelmed, and of course, because there's so much going on. So to have the guidance of the people you're bringing in to really think through some of these big questions is just huge. So it's such a service you're doing. So thank you. I can say a little bit more about who I am and what I do. You said most of it, but what I'm really focused on is how the brain works. And I'm a little different than a lot of folks because I'm not looking just at how the brain works from a Western psych perspective, but I've grounded my work in Taoist and Buddhist thought, which largely are philosophies. And a lot of people think, oh, these are religious systems, they often have got a religious tinge, but they were both philosophies first that blend really well with psychology. So a lot of what I'm doing is looking at how does your brain work in combination with, I wouldn't want to say spirit work, but how does your psychology work? How does the bigger sense of you connecting to the world work? When I was doing my PhD, one of the reasons, excuse me, that I didn't go clinical is because I was looking and I kept looking at people working individually, and I kept thinking, wow, this is such a small window of the world. I want to be in conversation with the community and the context that people are in. And so I went an academic route instead, and then did 4 years of postdoc to understand how the brain works. Ended up doing both, sort of. But it's really this context that I've been trying to figure out. And I think part of what's so interesting for us to talk about in the context of COVID-19 and everything that's been going on, how do people stand in their resilience and their strength as leaders?
Absolutely. It's a very tricky question. And Scott, as you know, most of the people that we've been interviewing in this series are CEOs of companies with teams that they need to lead. And so if we could just start with, what's some initial advice that you might give to a leader like that who has no idea what to do in the current moment and has to make decisions, maybe some tricky decisions that they've never had to make before? How would you start the process of advising them?
That's such a good question. And it's funny because every once in a while, somebody tricks me into coming and running their company. So I've done it twice with small companies and teams. And so I've been in this place, I've never been in this context we're in right now. But there's some things that I would say to folks just to start that are probably not what you're usually going to say to yourself. The first is to be gentle with yourself. So like very rarely does somebody say to a CEO, be gentle with yourself. They're really saying, make the smart decision, do the strategic thing. And here's what I need you to remember before you do any of that. Those are really good things to do. But first, you are human. And that's the basis for every bit of consulting and work I do, every bit of mentoring and coaching is to notice the humanity in you. And I say that not as a philosophical idea, but as human beings, we have some things in common. Our brains work certain ways. When we're exhausted, we make bad decisions. When we're afraid, we make crazy decisions. So we have to actually come back to ourselves and be gentle and just go, okay, cool, I'm human. I have all the same fears that all of my employees are having, which actually, if you can do that right away, you're going to take some pressure off. And the second thing that I would encourage folks to do is to get yourself grounded. Now, in the corporate world, we're talking a lot about meditation. We're talking about mindfulness. And these are really useful tools right now because what you're wanting to do fundamentally from kind of the sciencey side, which I love a little bit of geek out here, but we're trying to get people to move from what we call the sympathetic nervous system, which a lot of CEOs are going to be in, a lot of leaders, this place where fear is running and our options close down because all we're doing is sorting for danger. And my goodness, what a good time to be doing that, because the world feels really dangerous. We could talk a little bit more about trauma and how this is a kind of a trauma bath right now for everybody. But the core of that is, can we get ourselves into sympathetic, or out of sympathetic nervous system and into parasympathetic? So parasympathetic nervous system, I like to think of these as stressed out and peaceful nervous system. So the place where we're actually able to see possibilities, we're able to see options, where we can start to say, okay, well, yes, this is terrible. What is the need here? How can we meet it? What are the opportunities here? Because part of what I've been seeing, which is just so fascinating, is folks out opening up to new possibilities in their lives. So there's, for companies right now who are paying attention to how people are changing in the midst of a virus like this, they actually can say, what are people really wanting that I can do differently? And there's possibilities inside of every little space there.
You asked the obvious next question. What would be one basic step for someone who wants to make this transition from sympathetic to parasympathetic nervous system? What's a basic first step that you could give them?
Yeah, you know, it's so fun. I was actually, I've been teaching a lot lately because this is something I'm really passionate about. And so I teach people this thing that seems ridiculous. So I want to teach you a ridiculous thing. And it's fun. What I saw someone say to me this morning, she's a nurse at a hospital, and she said, wow, I've been teaching this to my patients now to get them calm. So we have a giant nerve that kind of bisects us underneath our diaphragm, behind our chest, that activates the parasympathetic nervous system. And if you do this very simple thing, which is to take one hand, and this is, you have to do this for 2 minutes. It sounds silly, but it actually is how long it takes, 2 minutes. I'm not going to do it for 2 minutes right now. So we're going to take one hand and we just trace the midline all the way down to the area right kind of below our belly buttons, one hand after the other. If you do this for 2 minutes, it's so funny. As soon as I do that, I just notice my whole belly fill up with breath, which is actually where we start to get calm, right? When we're kind of going nuts, which we all do, you know, we get a little panic, we get in a little crisis mode, like, am I going to be safe? Is my family going to be safe? Even if you're the CEO, like your family still gets sick. So when that happens, we start breathing just in the top chamber of our body. We actually, our brain has less oxygen, less choices. So if we do this for 2 minutes and just breathe, and you can just say the simple, like, it's okay, I'm safe, your brain can reset. So the brain goes, oh, okay. What it's essentially doing, you know, our sympathetic nervous system is designed to make sure that we're safe at all times. So it's checking when we're in that to see, like, is there a tiger coming for me? Is there a bear running down the road? Is there a car in the freeway? And if it's always looking for that, you know, we're always like this. But as soon as our system goes, no, there's actually none of that, we can breathe and we can return to a different state. Now, this is a small intervention, but part of why I like it is because this is something that every leader that I know, every parent that I know, I've got tons of parents teaching this to kids right now. You could actually go to a meeting and say, could we do something that's really silly for 2 minutes on Zoom? I know lots of people are meeting on Zoom. Could we just all breathe together for 2 minutes and just trace this track of our body that we all have, right? This works for every single human being, unless you're missing a torso. Now, there's people who are missing limbs, but I've yet to meet somebody who's missing a torso, right? We all have these pieces underneath our organs. So you can actually start a meeting and say, let's all ground ourselves. And one of the beautiful things is, you know, we all know we lead by example. We create a space in ourselves, and our employees and our teams can come into that space with us. So if we show up to a meeting and we acknowledge the fear in the room, we go, wow, you know, I know that so many of you are feeling nervous, you're feeling anxious, you're feeling overwhelmed, which is actually a very simple trick, by the way, that most CEOs know, to just simply become in rapport with the parts of your employees. So we say this and we say, can we take 2 minutes and do something that will shift us? And if you as a CEO, you as a leader are willing to be the silly one, it's like, oh, that's hocus pocus. It's like, not really hocus pocus, the nerve that runs through your body that we're activating. So if you'll lead for 2 minutes, then your whole team actually gets to be in a better place together and more resourceful. and they could take it back to their teams. So that's one of the simplest ones, and I do it all the time. I've yet to see somebody, sometimes if you do a visualization or you do some of the brain tricks, somebody says, oh, I can't imagine things. Nobody says I can't touch my chest. I can't trace the middle of me. I can't figure it out. Nobody's getting confused. So very, very simple intervention.
I think that's so beautiful. And I love how accessible it is and how it's something that you can just communicate to a broad group of people. So something that you touched on earlier, which I would love to dive into, is that there is a lot of trauma happening right now. I think you used the term trauma pool. And CEOs are dealing with situations in which their workplaces, their companies are full of people going through trauma. I was wondering if you could dive into that a little bit more. How is the workplace, how is the world a place of trauma, and how can, company leaders manage that and hopefully make it better?
Yeah, this is such a good question. We are, it is like a trauma pool. Like if you had a swimming pool and everybody jumped in together, that's where we are. So when we say like some people are having this experience, one of the first things to notice is it's not some people. This is actually an interesting time globally because everybody is having this experience. I work with folks literally from around the world. I joke that I'm on a global tour every morning. I'll start in London, then I'll work in Istanbul, then I'll work in Egypt, then I'll work in Singapore. So cross-culturally, and that's the point of this, whether it's Tokyo, California, every single person I talk to is showing the signs of trauma. And trauma just means essentially we have to deal with something from outside of us that we don't know how to deal with. So if you think about COVID right now, we're in a place where we don't actually know what's going on. I was trying just simply to get some information this morning about the effectiveness of masks. I saw a range of people going from the masks don't do anything all the way to if both people are wearing masks, we decrease our risk of corona to 1.5% transmission rate. Now, I actually don't know what the right answer is because there's so many people having different conversations. It seems crazy. So it's, at least wear a mask, please. So we can go the safer route for the moment. But confusion reigns. We don't have any sense of like what's real and what's not yet. We don't have any sense of being able to affect the enemy, quote unquote. So loss of control. One of my teaching partners is Japanese. And so we've been joking that this would be easier if Godzilla showed up because we could see Godzilla, right? All of us around the world could be like, there's a giant monster coming. Like we got to pool our resources. With COVID, we can't see it. We don't know who has it. You could not have it today and then somebody infects you tomorrow. So the whole world gets loss of control. So we're confused, we have loss of control, and we don't have an anchor for safety. So if you think about this, there's very few places right now, bar perhaps your home, where if you're like cleaning it all very well and you're not going out. So one of my friends said to me the other day, he hadn't been out of his home for 6 weeks. He was getting groceries delivered, everything came in, he was cleaning. So there's no place of absolute safety. Now, absolute safety is impossible because we could be anywhere and there could be an earthquake or some kind of natural disaster. But relative safety, most of us actually enjoy. So we have these three conditions that at their base are affecting everyone. So when we say we're in a trauma pool, we're all together going, holy crap, what's going on in the world? Where do we turn for a place of grounding and safety? So when you're working with employees, when you're being the leader of a team, I think the first thing we have to practice here is radical authenticity, which means if you try to pretend you're not human, nobody's going to believe you about anything. So if you say, I'm okay, you people have a problem. When I've been teaching, I share stories of like, whoa, I felt some fear. Like, whoa, this is not fun, right? This is a moment that even though I teach people how to alter their brains, there's still moments of unbalance. So for leaders, we actually have to really address what's going on for us so that we give people in our teams permission to also have real human feelings. Because this is the place where if you're pushing down real human feelings, people will do nutty things. Now we know that happens anyway, but at this level, when people are pushing down things, it's like, whoa, it's going to express in crazy ways. So that's the first one, to practice radical authenticity, just to sit with your people and say, yeah, I get it. Like, I have some fear too. I'm confused too. We're all figuring this out together. Those are our best leaders, the leaders who actually empower us by honesty. So then we're all together figuring things out. So that's the first thing I would note, as how do we get out of the pool? The second is to find pockets of safety. And so where can we be safe? Can that be, areas in our home? Are there things that we can do that we know will be much more grounded and safe in? And then the third is actually to address the confusion and see, what do we actually know? And this is useful always if we're confused, is just to stop and say, okay, well, we know this is airborne. We know, X, Y, and Z. So how do we deal with that? So we do release some of the emotion, because often the emotion is actually based on what we don't know. So we're stepping into anxiety going, oh my gosh, what happens if? Anytime we're hanging out in this what happens if, of course we're scared, right? That happens with anything. If you're in a relationship and you go, well, what happens if they have an affair? What happens if they leave me? But you're looking and they're going, well, they're with me right now, right? Same thing. Same thing if you have kids and you go like, well, what happens if they get hit by a bus? What happens if they get kidnapped? They're with you right now. So where we have to get back to is the present grounded moment, where we actually get to make choices based on what we know. And then we clarify what we don't know, which right now is a whole bunch. And we break down what we don't know. And with our teams, start asking people, okay, we don't know this. Is there a way we could find out? And so many teams are going to be able to say, yes, we'll go research this. Because the US in particular is a little behind the rest of the world in terms of this virus coming in. So other countries have been dealing with this, and they have some ideas already. And my suspicion is most of your companies are already doing this, but we may have to go, okay, well, what have we not asked yet that we can go ask people in other parts of the world? So hope that answers that.
I think so important for us to be trauma informed as leaders, because as you say, we're living in a trauma pool. Could you get a little, I'd love to hear sort of how you might actually define trauma for those that haven't thought about it before, for those that are new to it. Can you tell us a little bit about the relationship between trauma and emotion too, which I think is so important now?
Yeah, trauma is basically a fear response. So when things are out of control, they come from outside of us. It's like an impact. So you could think just at a simple level, when the world gets out of control and we don't know how to deal with it, we'd call it trauma. It's a kind of loosest level. So the brain has to figure out a way to cope with the experience. So you asked me to define trauma. What was the second half? Sorry,
And the second part was, so trauma clearly is deeply related to emotion, right? In your last answer, you talked about trauma and emotion. Can you speak to that in a bit more depth, please?
Yeah, thank you. So in terms of, so the body is dealing, and really, and I say this on purpose, the body is dealing, right? Not the brain. The brain has some effect or some conversation, but at our core, when we go into fear because something's happening we can't control, we don't understand, our body reacts first. Our little amygdala friend, which was designed to pick out danger, it actually comes online way faster than our conscious brain. And thank goodness, because if a car is racing down the road at you, if you have to use your conscious brain to think like, is that car coming too fast? Will I be okay? By the time you get to the end of the second question, you're like the bug on the windshield, right? You splat, we're in trouble. But if your body responds, right? So a car's coming down, you look over and you leap out of the way. You've probably done this with people in your car, especially with little kids. If there's an impact coming, you might reach your hand out. It's like, oh, and your kids go, oh, mom, dad, stop that, right? You don't need to do that. You've probably had somebody do that. Our body has an instinctual reaction. So our body is actually where our emotions live. So a lot of what people think about when they think about emotions, it's so funny. Folks will say like, oh, just handle that. Get over your fear, get over your sadness, get over your grief. It's like, well, get over it. Like, how do you just get over something that's a chemical reaction that happens in your body related to either a physical response? So like that's an adrenaline rush, right? A whole bunch of chemicals dump into my body when I need to leap out of the way of the car coming. Those chemicals need a bit of time to work through us. So emotion, all of our emotions are these little chemical chains that take some time. Now we can feed these chains, so we can create some loops, and everyone has done this, especially in fear. If you catastrophize or snowball your thoughts, this is that place where you go, wow, that felt really bad. Like, I feel confused. I don't know what's going on. What if something else happens? What if something else happens? Like, for me, I always think about this as like, you imagine, I had a conflict with my boss, and all of a sudden somebody's thinking like, oh, I'm going to lose my job. And it's just like a little disagreement. Maybe the other person didn't even notice, but all of a sudden I'm thinking I'm going to lose my job. And then if I lose my job, nobody's ever going to hire me again. And then somehow it always ends like with you sitting underneath a freeway overpass with a tin cup. And maybe if you're lucky, a little monkey who's doing a dance and helping you collect money. These are not likely scenarios, but it's what our brain does when we create these loops, these chemical loops, usually from telling stories, right? So our thoughts reinforce those experiences of our body, so those emotions. So if we have a little bit of fear, and then we start telling ourselves all the ways that we could have more fear, all the terrible things that could happen, which is pretty much turn on CNN or any news channel that are just blasting fear right now. Now, I'm not telling people not to watch the news or not to be informed. Let me say this way. I'm not telling people not to be informed. I've made a choice quite a while ago to stop watching the news and instead read it, because then I'm not getting triggered as much. But we have all these stories that then we tell ourselves, oh, there's more and more reasons to be afraid. I was sharing with you earlier that, I've been watching some of the things that are happening in the state I'm in, and all of the bad decisions that people are making around this virus, and thinking like, oh my gosh, what's going to happen next? What's going to happen next? The reality is I don't know, but we do have some information. So I'm, coming from something of an informed place. But those loops actually are what get us even more and more afraid. So the simple response is to stop the loop. So if at some point we can say, okay, I'm the CEO of this company, I'm leading a team, and I'm having all of this fear, we literally just have to stop, to breathe, to bring ourselves back to our this moment. This moment is the only moment you have power in. So if I'm in my fear out there, or I'm in my anxiety back there, I give up all of the power that I have to make an informed choice. So I've got to get back in this moment. And you can do this in all kinds of ways. You can do jumping jacks, you can leap up and down, you can, just breathe and notice your breath coming in and out. Any of those options will help you get back into the present. Okay. And just really, okay, I'm having some fear thoughts. And what if I could just be present for this moment? What's one thing I can control right now? What's one thing that I know right now? That will help you break some of that cycle, and it's actually just a matter of noticing. You're not paying attention to the story anymore. You're paying attention to something else.
It's such a beautiful piece of advice to kind of break these loops and get back into the moment, and how leaders can use that. Something that you mentioned earlier that I found very interesting is when we were talking about CEOs and leaders and the influence they have over their teams. A lot of, everybody knows that a CEO is responsible for company strategy, for the direction of the company financially. But a lot of the perspective that you're providing and that we agree with within our companies, they're also in some ways the emotional leaders of the company. Mm-hmm. They have these humans that they're leading. And I would love for you to elaborate a little bit more on how you view the role of the CEO from this human perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. So for me, so much of what we're talking about, we could view the CEO as the person driving the car, right? That's the way we think about strategic leadership if we take it out of emotion. So we see the car as different pieces that all go together. We have wheels, we have I don't know much about cars, but we have the parts of our car. You can tell I'm a city guy. But we have all these parts of a car, a steering wheel. We can see them very concretely and go, this is the car. The car's never going to do much more than what I'm going to direct it to, right? And that's the way a lot of CEOs think about companies. A lot of folks who kind of come from just the facts, this strategic perspective. But if instead you actually realize that every one of those parts of your vehicle has the capacity for expansion. They have the capacity to contribute. They have the capacity to have amazing ideas they can bring to the table. Then we start to think about companies in a different way. We start to thinking about them as living organisms. So Peter Senge years ago introduced this concept of learning systems, and has done brilliant work around companies and how companies are actually learning systems, and that sometimes the learning system comes from the smallest place you'd never expect. So in the same way, what I think about an organization or company as is much more like an orchestra. And so the CEO is a conductor. His or her job is to help bring out the best in every part of the organization so that they know at some points we want to hear a piccolo, right? This is important. And that little piccolo can get drowned out by everybody else, but that may be the voice we need to hear in a particular moment. So the CEO needs to then quiet the rest so we can hear that voice. And then we may need to hear the drums, or we may need to hear the trombones. The job is to bring out the best, and not just bring out the best individually, right? If all a conductor was doing at a concert was bringing out the best in each instrument, you would never hear everyone. So we actually need to play together. So the CEO's second job is to go, okay, I've brought out the best in you and you and you. And by the way, if the culture is to bring out the best in every person, to respect them, to see their contribution, they start doing it with each other. So all of a sudden, it's not just the conductor telling the piccolo, we want to hear what you have to say. We value your contribution. Now the piccolo is telling the violinist, and the violinist is telling the clarinet player. So we're all starting to see the value, and we're lifting each other up. So all of a sudden, this company, this organization that was just a bunch of parts, has now become this much greater whole. So that's the place I start, is how do you think about your team, your organization? And then once you know what the way to think about it is, how do I get the best out of these folks? And by the way, I just want to add this last piece. How do I also get the best out of myself? Because if my assumption is that everybody in the orchestra can grow, then also I need to grow as well. And you may be able to tell that I've been singing in music for a long time. I had an opportunity to sing with one of the best conductors with the Oregon Symphony. He was conducting the symphony, and he was conducting us for concert with Pink Martini a few years ago in Oregon. And part of what was so extraordinary about him is he let the emotion move through him. So every bit of emotion that he wanted us to bring out in our music, and both the singers and the accompanists, the musicians, he was showing us, right? He wasn't pretending. It wasn't like, oh, I'm surprised. He was feeling the surprise. He was being the conduit for which we could all come together. So that's how I see that.
It's such a beautiful riff on interdependence. It's very easy to think of business from an independence kind of frame, but you situated it so nicely in interdependence. And I think at moments like this, we're reminded of the importance of interdependence and how we all rely on so many complex systems all over the world. So love that last comment. And Scott, we're coming, sadly, this wonderful conversation, we're sadly coming towards the end of our time together. But wanted to, so just one or two more questions, but wanted, because we've been going into some serious conversations about trauma and fear, wanted to bring in a lighter note. And one of the big questions we love to ask our CEO guests is, how are they having fun in this moment? And so I'd love to ask you that question too. What is fun for Scott Mills these days?
That's a great question. It's funny, when I came, so I came out to be with my family during this Corona thing, and I thought, oh, life is going to be calm for a while. So I bought a ukulele. I had it shipped to where I was going. I thought, I'm going to learn how to play ukulele, and I'm going to garden. Now, I got here, and all of a sudden, as the world exploded, people from all over the world have been like, please, we need to talk to you. So my fun collapsed a little bit, just in terms of time. But I will say, first of all, there is such joy for me in connecting with people and in doing this kind of work. So part of my assumption is that anything that I'm going to do is going to have an element of fun in it. So it's a baseline for me. So if you would have called me up and said, hey, do you want to do this conversation, have this conversation? And I was like, well, they sound like horrible people. No, never, right? I'm not going to do that. So I do actually try to put it into everything, but where I've been getting the most grounding, the most joy lately, actually has been with my little dog. So we go out, we garden, we take big walks, and it's a sweet way to be, acknowledging social isolation or social distancing, but also having some fun. Getting out in the nature, being recharged, and so much of, at least for me, so much of being in trees, smelling trees, like letting my hands be in dirt, it reminds me kind of our human side and not just this heady part of us that can have really big ideas. And I have plenty of those because we're like, stop talking so long. We got other questions. I know you didn't say that, but you would not be the first person to tell me that. So those are the places that I have fun. And honestly, like you've met me in courses I've taught, Dan. So you know that for me, like all human interaction has an element of fun. And I'm just looking for the light and the joy in our connections as well.
Wonderful. That's such a beautiful, beautiful way to answer the question. So thank you for that. And for watchers who want to follow you, are there any social media handles or websites that, or anything that you've created recently that you would like people to take a look at?
Yeah, I've been sitting with this. What are the most useful things that people can be doing in the middle of Corona? And, we talked about helping CEOs step back into their resourcefulness, but really helping everybody on your team, helping the families of the team, helping the children on the team. Like we're all in this together, right? This is an orchestra bigger than any company. It's actually a global orchestra right now. So one of the things that I looked at is that all of my work has one thing in common, which is to help people come home to themselves. When all of my energy is out here, when my anxiety's out here, when my fear's out here, and I'm getting all riled up, I've lost myself, right? I'm not home anymore. I'm out there lost. So what I'm inviting people to do is come home to themselves, find their sense of grounding, get in touch with their brains and how their brains work, and really find some peace so that we can be resourceful and move forward. So I created a free series of meditations. It's one every other day for about 14 days, so you get 7, that each one takes you into a place in about 15, 20 minutes at the most, where you actually get to feel calm, resourceful, at ease without doing anything. You just listen, and most people just listen to them at night as they're going to sleep. And you can find that at scottwmills.com, I am home. So scottwmills.com, I am home. And that's the best place for people to start with me right now.
Fantastic. Wonderful. That's such a beautiful, calming way to end the conversation. So that's fantastic. We're also going to link to that in the comments underneath this video on LinkedIn, so people will have a chance to click that link. And Scott, once again, just such a beautiful conversation. Got so much out of this. So we're so grateful to you for coming on and sharing your wisdom.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Dana and Lisa. I always want to hear more from you because you're both so fascinating. So I know other folks will be excited to hear more. And thanks for having me on today. This has been great.